Chapter 9. At the Rubail, Imperial Palace. The metro ship of Avriel, the home ship, still being used as the Imperial Palace, had undergone several renovations by the present time. The enormous vessel, which once housed 1 million, now boasted upwards of 200,000 occupants. It was more than a bake, orbital palace. It was a small city. In one sector of that city, partitioned away from the flow of information that was truly important, dwelled the foreigners that had been bestowed with residences and offices. Sample Sangarini was one of them, a united humankind ambassador. The Empire seldom ever allowed foreign ships to enter any star system within its reign. However, economic exchange was permitted through 7 designated BDOS, trade ports. And as long as there is trade, there too must be diplomacy. That is why the Empire fielded and received diplomats to and from the other 4 nations. All the foreigners who resided in the Imperial Palace were in fact ambassadors of the 4 nations and their respective retinues. Throughout the entire empire, foreigners were permitted to take up residence only either here or in one of the 7 trade ports. While the empire did respect their privileges as diplomats, it placed no emphasis on diplomacy in general. Sangarini and his party were rarely ever allowed a meeting with any figures of significance, let alone an audience with the Empress herself, which was more or less reserved for the formal salutations that came with the assumption or abdication of the office. But at present, Sangarini and the other 3 ambassadors had been granted their second opportunity. The Imperial Palace possessed a Wabeus Bezerhat, audience chamber. However, use of this room was restricted to the most important ceremonies and matters of state, so Sangarini had never even laid eyes on it. More specifically, they had been called to the Wabeus Reserve, Chamber of Larkspurs, which more than lived up to its name with all of the purple Reserve, larkspurs, in bloom. Sangarini had scarcely believed it at first, but it appeared the Av did love the beauty of nature in their own manner. At the center of the hall, a path of black marble, polished to a mirror shine, allowed occupants to pace around. A spiral galaxy was inlaid in silver in the path, with a platform raised to its side, and a carved column depicting an 8-headed Gothnosh on each corner. Atop the platform stood a chair that paled in comparison to the jade throne, but it did look exceptionally comfy. A fair and comely woman was seated upright in it. Her intricately detailed circlet portrayed the Gothnosh as well. Her hair, wavy and indigo, was parted to both sides through her pointy ears, trailing down to her long robe of light crimson keynotes. Her countenance was graced with reddish-brown eyes tinged with hints of Dian, amber, while lithesome hands of ivory white poked out of the black sleeves of the military uniform she had on under the long robe. In one of those hands she gripped the baton that commanded the greatest military power that humankind had ever known. She was the 27th in the line of the emperorship. She was Spunes Lamas Aramida, Her Majesty the Empress, Lamas. The 4 ambassadors remained standing as they faced her. Sangarini was loath to abase himself. Arrogance was fundamental to the Av, about that there could be no doubt, but were they reckless in their arrogance? Irremitten, Your Majesty, said Sangarini, representing the other 3 as well. First of all, we would like to express our gratitude. Thank you for approving this dialogue. Your gratitude is noted, ambassadors. Lamas nodded. We are afraid our time is limited, and we believe your time is as well. Certainly. Sangarini returned the nod. He had no intention of wasting too much time on pleasantries, at least not in the company of a pompous Av. Let us get straight to the affairs at hand. I have come to raise an objection. An objection? Surely you mean you've come to offer an explanation. The Av Empress did not rebuke them, but she did say, "We've heard a fleet of yours launched an attack within Empire borders. We have lost contact, and the details are unclear. We had thought you may have some words of clarification." Ours are words of protest, Sangarini insisted. It is true, our military has launched an attack on your Svagov Marquisate. You must, however, think of that attack as retaliatory. Lamas remained expressionless. She merely raised one eyebrow infinitesimally. What I must ask is whatever you might mean by that remark. Sangarini exerted his level best to keep his own expression suppressed. Our nation had opened a new gate and was exploring the surrounding flat space. Then, a warship that was likely of sprung an attack upon us, without any justification. That warship was repulsed, but we suffered heavy losses as well. Hence, I have come as a representative of the united humankind to protest this grave miscarriage of justice. It may very well be the case that occurred near your territory, yet all ships have right of passage in flat space. Attacks without warning cannot be legitimized or excused. As the representative of the administration of my own nation and its people, I must concur with the United Humankind's ambassador's protestation, voiced Marimba Sune, ambassador of the Greater Alcant Republic, rage evident on her jittery face. If that's an act, it's a convincing one, thought Sangarini. I too, as the representative of the government and the people of the Hania Federation, continued Gwen Talong, his face a mask. Since he didn't know Barnew, he made do with a translator. As such, his personality was not so easy to grasp. Our nation concurs, said Janet Macaulay of the People's Sovereign Stellar Union in thickly accented Barnew. We have been continually plagued by your despotism. We firmly demand you apologize and pay reparations to our beloved alliance, and we will watch over negotiations with profound interest. Lama's expression remained utterly unimpressed. She stared at each ambassador in turn and planted her eyes on Sangarini's. And that is why you attacked our territory? We think that is rather removed from your typical way of doing things. Why didn't you raise an objection when your fleet was assaulted? The decision to retaliate was made at the commanding officer's discretion, said the ambassador, relaying what those in Central had told him. He didn't believe a word of it, of course. As you are no doubt well aware, it takes quite some time for messages to traverse the distance between Central and the outer reaches. If the commanding officer at the scene had ceded the decision to Central, then as your Majesty has stated, we would have raised a formal objection first and foremost. Lamas cocked her head ever so slightly. You are lying, ambassadors. What? I never. Sangarini bristled with anger. On what evidence do you base that accusation? We simply cannot be led to believe that a ship of our military would launch any such attack. There are no lawless reprobates in our illustrious star forces who would engage in battle against another party without a concrete reason. Then your Majesty should view this incident as an exception, obviously, said Gwen. Even if we were to grant, for the sake of argument, that there had been some exception, Lamas continued placidly, they would not then go on to be defeated. Do you think there are any officers in our illustrious star forces who wield the authority to decide whether to engage, and yet would be so incompetent as to initiate a battle they could not win with confidence? We cannot believe this one commander was outside the norm in two different ways at the same time. Your Majesty, you are being exceedingly biased, are you not? Said Macaulay. I suggest an intermediary commission of inquiry be established with members composed of 3 neutral nations. So you intend to lie to us as well, said the Empress, her icy glare on her now. You have formed an alliance, yet you mean to tell us you are neutral observers? We are neutral with regard to this matter, Your Majesty, asserted the ambassador of the PSSU. That is why we are asking you to investigate and uncover the truth. I implore Your Majesty to consider the People's Sovereign Stellar Union's proposal, added Sune. That is unnecessary. Lamas once again locked eyes with Sangarini. Ambassadors, we must say we were expecting much more refined deceit on your parts. You have dashed those expectations. What a pity. Wah! At a loss for words, Sangarini was left rudderless. From the outset, the Empress hadn't been inclined to seriously entertain what they had to say. The diplomatic skills he'd cultivated had run smack into a dead end. Why does Your Majesty persist in calling us liars? Said Macaulay. You ought at least to investigate the matter before deciding such a thing. If you four are satisfied that this pack of lies is the best you have, then we have nothing more to say. We suppose you may truly believe the lie, but in any event, the only deceit we the appreciate is more sophisticated deceit. Your Majesty, if I may. It is incumbent upon me to inform you that if you were to declare war on the united humankind, we of the People's Sovereign Stellar Union would be forced under the Nova Sicilia Accords to declare war upon the Empire. We must thank you, ambassadors, said the Empress sarcastically. But we are well aware. The Greater Alcant Republic and the Hania Federation are doubtless of the same mind. The 2 ambassadors nodded their solidarity. Very well. Then let us make war, said Llamas, with no enthusiasm whatsoever. Your hard work was appreciated. We hope you return to your homeland safely. We shall be revoking your diplomatic privileges in 24 hours' time. Though we hardly need assure you, the Empire will guarantee your security and see you to free port, or its honor be tarnished. Wait, you can't. Sangarini screeched inwardly. This can't be how it all ends. I'm the most experienced diplomat in all of the UH, but I wasn't even given a chance to talk terms. She not only called my nation's official message a lie, but a bad lie at that. Do I have no choice but to accept this declaration of war and return to my country? This was supposed to be a trial run. We were just throwing the Empire off balance to see what their next move would be. But now this was all just a fool's errand. Your Majesty, is there any chance you might reconsider this? Asked Gwen in a low voice. You will be waging war against half of all humanity. Have you forgotten that the Empire forms the other half? Responded the Empress evenly. If you wish to wage war, then that's fine by me, said Macaulay, forgetting their duties as a diplomat as they vented their pent-up irritation. I have, however, one thing to assure you, that the Empire, unprincipled as it is, can never hope to prevail. Unprincipled, you say? At last, Llamas's expression changed. She was intrigued. It is as you say. Our Empire has no principles. We do not believe that has any bearing on whether we win or lose. That the unprincipled cannot win is nothing more than a delusional superstition. But think of humanity's future. A destiny where humanity is ruled by the unprincipled empire is no future at all. We know a little about human history ourselves. History reveals it is the principles held by individuals that shine bright and beautiful. Principles enforced by nations, on the other hand, engender tragedy. They drive subjects of those nations to needless deaths. Our empire does not require any principles and exists without them, devoted only to the consolidation of all of humanity in all of its diversity. The empire hosts a multitude of citizens, with a multitude of bizarre creeds and convictions. For instance, the people of the Druhianu Bislar, Kingdom of Bile, do not understand that they are under imperial control and worship their territorial citizen representatives as gods. To them, we are the fruits of mysterious and inscrutable beings. The territorial citizens of the Druhianu Gogamr, Kingdom of Gogoth, implant their own consciousness into computing crystals, thinking they have thus acquired eternal life. The empire rules over and protects them all like a shadow, and without discrimination. If the empire can be said to have a principle, it is that. That is all sophistry. The very idea of a future born by the who toy with man's DNA, is repugnant. And that is hyperbole, replied Llamas. Around 2,000 years have passed since the births of our progenitors, yet the basic genetic composition of the has not changed. We, like you, are bound by the fear of evolving. Fear of evolving? Do you deny it? The buds of evolution are plucked away as genetic abnormalities. When humanity obtained the power to engineer their genes to their liking, what they did was seal away their own evolution. Our empire is no different in that respect from your own home nations. We all fear evolution. But Macaulay held their tongue. Your Majesty, with all due deference, said Sangarini. It was clear to see that the Empress enjoyed a good debate. He needed to use this debate as a pretext for keeping this audience going as long as possible. Also, he could search for a lead, any lead that could get her to negotiate. Fear of evolving is beside the point. Can a nation without principles even survive? I dare say we will dismantle such a nation without fail. The empire has not had a principle to use as a crutch for around a millennium, Llamas rebutted calmly. I see now that nations such as your own would crumble without principles, or perhaps delusions is the word. Otherwise, you might not be able to bring together varied populaces or face other nations. Is it not the same for the empire? Said Gwen. It is not. For it is we who keep the empire bound together. It is because the will integrate all of humanity that no one will ever again be burdened by the principles imposed upon them, able instead to enjoy their cultures and lifestyles as they currently exist. Then what is it about the that can hold this hypothetical, all-encompassing empire together? Said Sangarini, refusing to back down. That is nothing you ought to concern yourselves with, said Llamas coldly. Leave us now. Your falsehoods failed to arouse our interest, but we found these last few moments amusing enough. It was a fun little meeting. And allow us to say that should we emerge from this battle triumphant, it will have been the war to end all wars. You mean you aim for everlasting peace? Macaulay's swarthy face flushed with hatred. Many have dreamed of such a thing, and yet it has never come to pass in all of history. A grin graced the Empress's arresting visage. This was not the infamous smile of the Av. No, it had a warmth to it, as though charmed by the ignorant innocence of the infants before her. When Sangarini saw that grin, he felt in his bones how she lived for nearly 100 years despite her youthful mien, and how young her race was. The self-respect necessary to bear the weight of humanity's fate on her delicate shoulders was more than evident as she declared, "That is because there were no Av in the past." After the ambassadors reluctantly left, Lamas called for a video representation of all the flat space discovered so far to be projected across from the platform on which she sat. Within charted space, there were around 30 million gates. Those gates' normal space entrances were always within the Urukvak Milky Way. This phenomenon likely spurred from the decoupling of normal space and flat space after the fluctuation of the cosmic sparks that originated the galaxy. However, the positions of those gates and the positions of the galaxy's stars did not correlate. The greater number of normal space side gates seemed to be located in the spiral arms. The coordinates of the gates could be likened to a ripple. The circle at the center was surrounded by a great multitude of spech rings that constituted groupings of gates. The center circle was so crowded that space-time bubbles couldn't penetrate. The space-time particles, expelled by innumerable proverbial volcanoes, formed dense currents headed toward the galaxy's fringes. Outside the central circle existed a narrow gap, past which one would run into a round band of gates. That was the Spech Kasna first ring. After that came a slightly larger gap, followed by the Spech Kasna second ring. Thus did the gate belts of the Milky Way, otherwise known as the Sodlak Urukvar, radiate from the center toward the periphery, in alternating gaps and rings. Furthermore, the farther out the rings, the bigger the gaps that separated them. In addition, each ring contained an almost equal number of gates, so the gates in the outer rings were much more spaced out. The gates that humanity made use of were mostly within the dense Sor-Bandasar, central sector, the sector within the Spech Dana, seventh ring. As such, if one secured a closed gate within normal space and entered flat space from there, there was a naturally high probability they would emerge in the central sector. Humanity expanded its domain by establishing gates near the center as footholds and forging normal space paths to the next closest gate, and so on. Even in the space spanning the Spech Ghana, 8th ring, to the Spech Losutina, 11th ring, once referred to as the Sor Karaza, uncharted sectors, gates to inhabited star systems were scattered about as a result of humanity's insatiable drive to expand. The empire was composed of 8 Fasek monarchies, each with a Larth monarch. Lamas herself was still the Larth Kryeb, monarch of Kryeb, until she finally handed that position down to a descendant. However, just as grandees did not govern their territory nations, so too was the title of monarch mostly a formality. The lords of the various territories included in each monarchy were not vassals of their respective monarchs, but rather of the emperor or empress. As such, the monarchies were not so much administrative divisions as they were regions on the map. Of the 8 monarchies, 7 were nestled up close to the central sector, resulting in complex borders with other nations based largely on regional power and influence. The other monarchy, the Fasek Ilikar, monarchy of Ilich, was located in the Spech Ramada, 12th ring. Each of the 8 monarchies had a corresponding gate in the imperial capital of Lokvakar. The 8 gates were built into the cityship Avriel, and when they were opened, in accordance with the laws of probability, 7 of them linked to the central sector, but the Sodek Ilikar, gate of Ilich, was the outlier, linking instead to a quite remote frontier. The empire regarded this as a rare and curious opportunity and consequently set themselves to seizing the 12th ring as their own. They invested nobles with fiefs and constructed military bases. Just before the last step in the process, the completion of the route encircling the 12th ring, a forgotten but peopled world called the Hyde star system was discovered. The Illich monarchy was shaped much like a pair of arms embracing the Milky Way gate belts, and so it was often called the Bar Sadak, arms of the Av. That moniker was ill-fitting now that the two hands had joined, however. Within the generally sparsely distributed gates of the 12th ring, a relatively dense grouping of gates had been observed. It was thought that that grouping comprised a sector that overlapped with the gate belt ring that corresponded to a different galaxy entirely. Humanity had not reached that level of exploration yet, but the door to a galaxy beyond lay open before them. A door open only to the Av Empire. For so long as the Illich monarchy was there, no nation besides the Empire could hope to reach outside the galaxy. Of course, that would change if one or more gates linking to a place further out than the Illich monarchy were to be discovered. That sensation of confinement might have factored into the Four Nations Alliance FNA's determination to wage war. How inane. There were yet many worlds of which humanity could avail themselves. The Svogov Marquisate had been part of the Illich monarchy. If the enemy took Svogov, it would chop off one of the arms of the Av. Faramunch, are you indisposed, or can you come? Using her Rugruk, Imperial Command Staff, Lamaz drew the pattern of summons. Your Majesty. The hologram appeared by the map of flat space. His blue-gray hair was braided and suspended down his front from his shoulders. He was Yilid Ryazan, military chief of staff, and Imperial Admiral Faramunch Yom Raz's Rizm. Were you listening in? Yes, Your Majesty. How much of what they said do you think was valid? I believe we can take them at their word that they opened the gate. That being said, I think the reason they sent a military fleet was to sever the connection between Vorlash and Svogov. They must have already explored the surrounding area in secret years ago. Did the Spodek Reariger Information Department not notice? Unfortunately, that is the case. That is quite the blunder. There is no excuse I can provide. Faramunch lowered his head, though he was not obsequious in his humility. Has the Empire, in its age, become the sick man of the galaxy? Muttered Lamaz. Faramunch didn't deny the possibility. It could also be that the idea they'd do something this elaborate never occurred to the department. The enemy did keep an impressively tight lid. And while it is not my intention to provide excuses, might I suggest that the Gasek Skofereimer ambassadorial office also failed to catch on. True, Lamaz nodded. The only reports we've received from that office of late warn of the possibility of large-scale military action, nothing more. It's clear that much effort was spent to drum up a unified front, which is a feat indeed for a patchwork army like theirs. Faramunch's tone of voice betrayed some measure of exhilaration. Trade, commerce, those were everyday sport. War, on the other hand, was a rare treat of a game, and that much more enjoyable for it. And Faramunch was hardly the only one whose heart thumps fast upon acquiring a worthy opponent. Lamaz's position was a different beast. In the end, as Empress, she was forced to wager not only her own life, but her subjects' too. She was excited by the prospect as well, of course. She just felt somewhat guilty that she did. As for our felled ship, said Lamaz, turning to the matter that weighed on her most of all, it was patrol ship Gosloth, correct? Yes, said Faramunch, his face mournful. There is a higher than 90% chance it was the Gosloth. We can't pinpoint the gate they used as of yet, but in any case, it's the only ship that matches the details. You have my condolences. Spare your condolences, she said, shutting him down. It is an Avriel tradition to be the first to the front lines of battle. Yes, but Hecto Commander Captain Lekshu was an outstanding star pilot even among the star forces. I believe she would have been sure to send the young Viscountess of Parhan away to relative safety. Her Highness is a trainee star pilot after all. Any pretext would have sufficed. You needn't console me with platitudes. If that were the case, news of Leifir being unharmed would have reached these ears. My apologies, Your Majesty, said Faramunch, looking abashed. Although, Lamaz proceeded to mutter to herself. She had always liked Leifir. Dubious, had not been a good son, but it seemed he had some surprising talent as a father. If only she hadn't fallen in battle while bearing some half-baked title like trainee. If only she died a full-fledged star pilot. Then they'd all have been readier to swallow her death. Fi Lart Cryab, His Highness the King of Cryab, must be deep in the abyss of grief as well, added a sudden voice besides Faramunch's. He lost both his lover and his daughter of love at the same time. Larth Barker, King of Barca. Llamas frowned when she spotted the voice's source. I don't remember summoning you. This is a serious affair concerning the Empire. Please pardon my impertinence, Your Majesty. So said the hologram of Imperial Admiral, Imperial Fleet Commander-in-Chief and Crown Prince Dusan, King of Barca, before bowing. If you wish to console Dubious, then you ought to go to his side, Fi. No, Your Majesty, I shall do so on another occasion. Unless, of course, you decree I should depart by Imperial edict. I have come here to see whether you might. No, you shall wait. I shall wait. His features, too perfectly arranged for a man, formed a quizzical look. Faramunch, said Llamas, prompting the military chief of staff to do the explaining. Honored Fleet Commander, Faramunch addressed his high-ranking colleague. It has been established that the enemy invading the Svogov Marquisate is proving surprisingly slow to act. I hope the only reason for that is an undersized force of arms. You mean it might be a diversion, Lanyu? Dusanyu stroked his chin. What else could it be? You can be apprised of all the details if you visit the Ryazan Military Command Headquarters. No, Lanyu, that won't be necessary. The Crown Prince stopped Faramunch with an outstretched hand. I know battlefield analysis is your forte. So, what's their next move? Their target is probably here. Lokvakar, he said. Their ardor is certainly alarming, Fi. So they aim to capture the capital in one fell swoop. Dusanyu's expression lit up attentively. If the capital fell, the 8 monarchies would no longer be linked together, thereby horribly weakening the empire. We don't know whence they'll invade. For the 7 monarchies at the central sector, they could strike from anywhere. Do you understand, King of Barca? Spoke Llamas from her temporary replacement throne. Our forces cannot move rashly. We must have you helm the defense of the capital. Faramunch, orchestrate the fleets we shall entrust to the King of Barca, and quickly. We leave his forces scale to command headquarters. We do, however, expect it to be historic in size. Yes, Your Majesty. Have you any other orders? Faramunch asked the throne. No. Do it at once. As Your Majesty commands. Faramunch's hologram cut out. Dusanyu's did not. Is there something else you wanted, King of Barca? Forgive me. I was just contemplating your words regarding the fear of evolution. How like you, Fidusan. You would rob us of our time through your ceaseless philosophizing. You enjoy it, too, do you not, Your Majesty? Llamas could only smile wryly at his perspicacity. We do. Is there not a possibility that humanity would benefit from our defeat in this war? Oh ho. And what makes you say that? Llamas knitted her brows. Were we to win, all humankind would, under order and serenity of rule, given to a peace that's eerily akin to an everlasting slumber. A peace that would hamper human evolution. Which means if they win, the power of evolution would be unleashed. We trust you heard the ambassador's words. They fear evolution more than we the Ov do, claiming that even the slight genetic modification of our children we practice ought to be abolished. I am aware, Your Majesty. However, their victory would assuredly lead to an age of chaos. They may be 4 consolidated nations now, but were they to lose their common enemy in us, they would certainly begin jostling for power. That would in turn shroud all of humanity in disarray, a return to the era when humans were powerless, knocked out by the stormy waves of evolution. Is that what you desire, Fi? No, he shrugged. They say we are long-lived, but ultimately, we aren't long-lived enough to be able to see where evolution will lead us. Of what concern is it to us what happens after we die? Then why are you contemplating that? Sometimes, I find I dwell on humanity's future. That is to say, not on what we should do for it, but on how it will unfold. Fidusan, she said gently. The emperorship will be yours after us. If you would like to cast humanity into chaos after securing your seat on the Jade Throne, then by all means do so. However, so long as this staff remains in my hands, we will aspire to peace, whether or not it spells humanity's slumber. And you shall exert yourself to the fullest in furtherance of that goal. That cannot be disputed, said Dusanyu, bowing elegantly. No matter how it may affect humanity's destiny, I would hardly be pleased to lose to the likes of the Four Nations Alliance. We are relieved to hear that, for we know you would never neglect what would or would not amuse you, regardless of humanity's or the Empire's fate. Of course, he said, as though that went without saying. And there is revenge to be had as well. Oh ho, Llamas was taken aback. We didn't realize your heart was so troubled over Lafier. Yes, Fee Lamhair must be avenged, but more personally, there was another aboard that ship with whom I shared a bond. Yarluk Dryor Hater. Llamas was even more taken aback now. You are exhibiting a most unexpected side of you, Fee. Did I take you by surprise? Dusanius smiled. I pride myself on as good as creating that Countdom and its noble house. His estate could use at least one person here at the seat of the Empire worrying about it. That was what transpired 18 hours after intel confirming the fall of the Svogov Marquisate reached the Imperial Palace.